Hi, I'm John Papola, and you're listening to the Emergent Order podcast. On this episode of the podcast, I have a conversation with Sean Sheppard. Sean is the founding partner at GrowthX and GrowthX Academy, an investment firm and an accelerator, helping young companies become economically sustainable and also grow. Our conversation takes several interesting turns and dives into something we haven't talked very much about in the past, which is, how to think about what sales really is. So I hope you really enjoy this conversation and get as much out of it as I did. Sean's got a lot to share and a lot of experience. So Sean, when we first met, you shared a bit about your story and about this company GrowthX that you founded, and you have such an interesting take on the world of startups and venture capital and how to build a business. But I really wanted to start by just jumping all the way back. Well, actually, why don't you just summarize for me and for our listeners, what you currently do, and then we're going to go in the time machine back to the very beginning. So, what do you do? What's your job? What's your company?
Sure. I am one of the founding partners of GrowthX. We are a seed stage venture capital fund based in San Francisco, California. We invest in early stage companies. We help them grow through our fund and our Accelerator program. We have an academy that develops the talent to work in the startup community, in particular in the roles that are most needed to help companies with growth. Through GrowthX Academy, we have a business called GrowthX Studios that works with funded companies to help them grow. And we also have a corporate innovation team in business that helps corporates through corporate innovation, as well as working with and investing in startups, helping them leverage the latest technologies to transform their business and harness disruption in this innovation economy. And then that's evolved us into working with governments and educators on building startup ecosystems, very similar to what we've successfully been a part of here in Silicon Valley for the last 75 years. The reason this is what I do is I started in the Wayback Machine as a serial entrepreneur, turned investor, turned frustrated investor, because my companies and the companies we were investing in were failing, not because they didn't know how to build and deploy technology, but because they didn't know how to build markets for their technology. And so we set about to solve our own problems. And as they popped up one at a time, we sort of addressed them in very, thoughtful and focused ways with some really smart, awesome people. So as a result, we've created a very unique approach, and I'd like to say an innovative and disruptive approach towards reducing the failure rate of startups, improving the scale-up rates, and then also just overall addressing the unique dynamic of taking anything someplace new. In particular, our field around technology, the dynamic where most failure happens around the stage of trying to take something someplace new, whether that's an existing thing to a new place, a new thing to a new place, or a new thing to an existing place. And in our particular field, it happens to do, because it's our interest and our desire and our sort of domain, technology. But our programming and our approach, our methodology, our framework, our way of doing things can be applied to any human-to-human interaction. I always talk about it in terms of it's an H-to-H experience. It's not a B2B or a B2C or a marketplace or hardware, software, technology, services, widgets. It doesn't matter. The failure always happens in that experience of trying to learn efficiently and effectively about where your thing, whatever that thing is, fits in a particular market. And so we just went through trying to solve for that and do it in a way that just wasn't based on intuition and experience of the collective wisdom of all of these years as entrepreneurs, as a group, but how to really do it in a programmatic way so that it could be easily, that knowledge could be transferred. Because at this stage in my life, my real question I wanted to answer for myself was how do I give back at scale, with my quote unquote superpower, the thing I'm really good at, which is launching and growing companies. And that's sort of how it's evolved.
How did you first discover that entrepreneurial impulse in yourself? Was there a first, whether it's a lemonade stand as a kid or projects in school, take me back to the first moment where you had that entrepreneurial bug bite you.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a point in life, unless you go through some sort of regression therapy, where you can't remember back that far. Because honestly, John, it's always just been a giant screaming voice in my head. I don't ever remember a time where it wasn't there. Everybody's got their little voice on their shoulder inside their brain. This one has always been calling me and telling me who I am, not asking me who I want to be. And that's what I always tell people when they go, how do you become an entrepreneur? I'm like, you don't choose it chooses you. Truly. And I don't mean that people can't be entrepreneurial or people can't start their own companies or businesses if they don't have that screaming voice inside their head, like I've had, that impulse or compulsion. But the purest, to me, the purest entrepreneurs are people who just don't have a choice. And so as far back as I can remember, I always had the impulse to try things, do things, learn things, attempt things, test things, break things, fix things, change things without ever thinking about the impact or consequence of that. I like to tell the joke that, there's really two things I did as a kid that are kind of fun stories. The first one was, I like to make the joke, I was an adolescent orange dealer.
I can't wait to hear this one.
Yeah. Well, back in the day, right? I'm 47 now, and I was obsessed with Bruce Lee, and I was into Taekwondo, and, I was doing martial arts, and me and all of my friends. And this goes back to the early 80s. And I would order these Chinese throwing stars out of the back of Black Belt magazine. And this was at a time where you could literally just fill out a form, check a box that says, yes, you're 18 years or older, put cash and change, coins, in an envelope with who knows, what was it back then, maybe a 5-cent stamp, and mail it in. In 4 to 6 weeks, it'd show up in a box, you'd get, weapons.
Is it wrong that I feel like this is the evidence of better times for America?
Yes, this is truly a time when there was less regulation and more fun. So that obviously those would show up, and then my friends would be, hey, these are cool. Sell me some. And I'm like, well, no, these are mine. And they said, well, we'll pay you $5 for one. And I'm like, well, shit, I only paid 75 cents for this thing. Okay.
And so the arbitrage begins at an early age.
Yes, exactly. So next thing you know, I'm supplying my community with Chinese throwing stars and everything else I could buy out of the back of Black Belt magazine that would absolutely poke someone's eye out, pierce their skin, or break their ankle. Now, to my knowledge, no one was ever harmed by the use of this or by my distribution in an enterprising way. But I was able to make enough money to take my family to Disneyland for a couple of extra days during a summer vacation when we didn't have a whole lot of money. Of course, Disneyland back then was only probably about $10 a day as well, versus now. But I was really proud of that.
So
that
were
was
your
my
parents
first foray into it.
Were your parents like, so Sean, where did you get the where did you get this money? Did that come?
Oh, well, they knew. I mean, they knew that I was also mowing lawns and I was doing a lot of different things.
Oh, okay,
but,
yeah.
I mean, the primary source of revenue was definitely in the arms. But could you imagine? So I did that through, like 7th grade, but could you imagine? And I was literally excelling at school too. It was horrible. Could you imagine that happening
Child
today?
Protective Services.
Oh.
Yeah, Child Protective Services would be called on your parents within the first evidence of a throwing star being in the hands of another kid in the neighborhood.
Oh my God, it was just yeah. Today I'd be national news would be everywhere. Teenage adolescent arms dealer, and so that was that was one of my favorite experiences. But I did a lot at all of those things, and then I got very much into athletics, and that was always sort of my thing as well, and loved team sports. But I really I got obsessed and attracted very much into golf, because it was the sport I think that was the most difficult. Number one, as I look back on why I loved it so much, and I still do to this day, it was the toughest one for me to excel at. So it captured my attention. Number one, and number two, it doesn't lie to you. The golf ball does exactly what it does. It's based on physics. It can only do 9 things, and then there's only 5 reasons why it can do those 9 things. And when you understand what those things are, it's very easy to get real-time feedback and then make adjustments. And so I love that about it. What I don't love about it is the solitary piece of it. If you're actually doing it competitively, it's a very lonely existence, which is why I got burnt out on it. But I played competitively through high school. I played in college, and then I played professionally for a few years, and then even taught it. And then I learned my love for teaching and educating and helping from that experience. Never lost my love and passion for golf. I just sort of put it in a different place and needed another challenge. So then I went back into, and golf as a profession was very entrepreneurial. You got to get up and do your own thing. There's nobody else there to motivate you or tell you what to do. And so I just carried that forward into trying different things. So I tried to be an entrepreneur in a different aspect of the golf industry, and then I got into technology, and then I've been pretty much in technology ever since. 20 plus years of either starting or being a part of starting tech companies and growing them. And I've had 5 startups. I've had 3 successful exits and 1 very expensive learning experience along the way. And now I've sort of taken that collective experience, and I'm really kind of focusing, like I said, on trying to support entrepreneurship and innovation on a global scale. Because to me, I think that's the ultimate. That's what I'm best at, and I really do enjoy it. I love getting up every day and having conversations like this with people like you. I know you and I have had separate conversations about your business and the things that you're doing and what you want to do, and that's the stuff that excites me. And that's where I am now.
I want to dig deeper into some of that backdrop, because first of all, I also in high school, golf was my sport.
Really? Awesome.
It's funny. It was more of it's funny because it is a sport in that you move your body, but it is more of a game in the sense that it is it is so technical, which I loved about it and still love about it. And then it's also so strangely psychological, because the mechanics of the swing, once you've got that down, theoretically, you should be able to replicate it. But but as anybody who's hacked their way through a golf game knows, every swing is a little different, and you get in these sort of momentum moments where you can really be on a streak, and then you can go downhill and you can start to question yourself, and it's a very interesting game in that way, compared with, I think, a lot of other sports where your your raw athleticism can get you. It can't get you to the pros in any game, in any sport, but your raw athleticism in a lot of other sports can get you far enough that you are clearly better than your buddies who aren't trying.
Yeah.
Whereas with golf, you can be a fantastic athlete with unbelievable hand-eye coordination and a sense of timing and space and an instinct, and the technical requirements of hitting that ball accurately and consistently will just crush you. It just doesn't care. A 65-year-old overweight guy will leave you in pieces as a 20-year-old, fit 6'5", beast. And I don't know. There's not a lot of games that you can play that have that like asymmetry between like athleticism and technical skill. I feel like
that's absolutely right. It's humbling as hell. And where else, by the way, can you drink and drive on somebody else's lawn for 4 hours and get away with it?
So you actually got to, what was that like getting to play professionally? Like, break that down for me a little bit. So I understand, you get good in school, you're playing in college, to actually become a PGA pro. What did that involve? Like, what are the steps? Like, and how good did you have to actually be? Like, what was your handicap?
Well, I had to be a lot better than I was. I can tell you that. Otherwise, who knows? I might still be doing it. Let's see. I think at my height, I was about a plus 4.7, I think. But the best players in the world are +6 to +8, and so when you do the math over 4 rounds of golf, they are 8 to 16 shots clear of someone like me over 4 rounds, and that's the difference between making it and not making it.
So for the non-golfer, what break down what those pluses and numbers mean.
Well, I mean, if
they don't know golf from bowling.
That's all right. Well, you use the word handicap, so you're the one asking the technical questions here, Johnny.
Right, yeah, that's right.
So the handicap is it's just it's a measure of how you of what you score relative to par. So if par is 72 and your handicap is 0, you should be shooting on average 72. Really less than that, more like 70.5 to 71, somewhere in that range, not to get too technical. So if you are a -2, that means that you are shooting somewhere to over par. It's really weird. They use the minus when it really should be plus, but the point is that a +4 is somebody who should be shooting on average about, four shots below par. But the best players in the world.
So you're parring most of the holes and you're birdieing a bunch, and maybe you're getting an eagle here and there.
Yeah, I'm just saying that somebody who's a +4 handicap should be shooting below par on average 10 of their 20 best scores 50% of the time, over time. So anyway, the point is that there's a very narrow margin between good and great there. But most of it comes down to, yes, everybody has that athletic ability or the ability to execute well on controlling what a golf ball does and where it goes. But you also have to have that. You have to have the discipline, the drive, the belief in yourself, and nothing to stand in your way psychologically to prevent you from being successsul. And that's really what happens with most people. Most people are in their own way. Most people have enough skill and or ability to be great at any one particular thing they want to do. I'm a big believer in the notion of Malcolm Gladwell's 10 years and 10,000 hours. If you can just find your one thing, focus on it, and spend an obsessive amount of time on that one thing, and be open to growing and learning and developing as you go on that journey, then you can be great at anything. And you find the people who are most successful are people that have enjoyed the journey and don't give two shits about the destination. That's not what they're thinking about. And golf is very, manifests itself in a very obvious way, in my mind. And you see that with great individuals in any sport. Obviously we just lost Kobe Bryant. I'm a Northern California guy. I hate the Lakers. But I mean, with a passion. I was raised that way, right? I don't like the Lakers. I don't like the Dodgers. I don't like any Southern California teams. It's sort of like the north side, south side of Chicago, or the, Jets and Giants thing, whatever you want to call it. But I have nothing but respect and admiration for that guy, because he lived exactly the personification of what success can look like and should look like for everybody in life, regardless of how they choose to apply themselves into what area. His one thing was to be great, and he enjoyed the work every single day. And then he did it not just in basketball, but you, as a filmmaker, can appreciate what he was doing as a storyteller after he decided to retire from basketball. He was just going to apply his craft in another way, in another area. And what did he do? He does one short film and he wins an Academy Award, right? So that's about him and his behavior and his habits and his actions. And I think that's a lesson we can all take. Now, I just read my favorite book of late last year. There are really two, but my favorite one of the two was this book by James Clear called Atomic Habits, which talks about, what you do today manifests itself in the results of tomorrow. And every step that you take today is either a leading indicator of what's happening today or a lagging indicator of what's going to happen tomorrow. And so how you move through the world and how you act and behave is what's going to drive the results you have, good or bad. And so that's, I look at that, and I look at, a guy like Kobe, and I go, yeah, that's it. And golf was always that for me. And then it rolls into the business world. Startups are hard. They're freaking hard. They're emotional roller coasters. You're a strange person taking something strange to a strange place full of other strangers with no credibility whatsoever. And that's freaking hard, especially if it's something that's new, unique, or different, and not something that is easily understood.
So when you, I know that one of your early companies was a golf firm that was in trouble, and that you got involved with it and turned it around. Like, tell me about that experience. What was the company, and how did you get involved in that? And because it's such an interesting thing to come into something like that and actually make a difference. Because I think for so many people, especially inside organizations, it can seem like organizations have a kind of momentum that's immovable by an individual. So to come in and make change happen in any organization, I think, is really difficult. Tell me about that story.
Yeah, well, I mean, by that point in my career, I had been out of golf now for the better part of about 6-7 years. I had decompressed from the competitive nature of it and those aspects. And I had started to build my portfolio of experience around being in technology, being on the side of technology that was responsible for taking things to market, sales and marketing in particular. Either being the first or second, sales or marketing person in a company, or being a co-founder in that role. And saw an opportunity, always missed golf, loved the industry, but also saw how, sort of old school it was, and what fixed mindset it had. And so I saw an opportunity to acquire this company that was once a kind of a great brand, and it had fallen on difficult times after being sold by the founding family to another group that didn't do very well with it, and saw an opportunity to sort of change the business model, innovate it, and then also apply what I learned about sales and marketing at scale, what I knew about golf, and the insights from the industry, as well as what I knew about what technology could do to make golf a better game, make it easier and more fun and enjoyable for people to play, help generally grow it, and then distribute that in a scalable way. So came in and immediately started to understand it, learn the business, learn the customer base, learn what the market needed and how we could deliver it in a different way. And I was always big on helping people play better golf through the insights that come from building better equipment and building equipment that was fit for the individual, not for the masses. And manufacturing at that time wasn't really conducive to mass customization. So I had to figure out another way to do it. So what I realized is that for me to sell more of what I wanted to sell, I had to make it easier for people in the marketplace and the retail environments to sell it. So I came up with a piece of technology that automated the club fitting process by leveraging all the existing tools that already existed in the marketplace, the launch monitors that can track the ball, the measurement tools that can measure an individual's physical attributes, creating by working with a collective group of the smartest and best teachers in the world, building essentially a survey and intake process that collected data that would give you insights into someone's abilities, skills, and then also what their real true desires were. And then putting that all together in an automated solution we called IntelliFit, and then essentially giving it to the retailers as a way for them to automate club fitting and then place orders through e-commerce so they didn't have to carry inventory. So there's a bunch of business model benefits to it. They sold more custom equipment. Customers were happier. I was able to sell more stuff. But a great irony of it at the end of the day is the technology became more valuable in the marketplace than the actual equipment. And so I sold the company mostly for the technology. And it's still used today in most major golf retailers.
You said that you when you stepped away from playing golf professionally, that you went into this world of sales and being either a salesperson or a founder that was leading the sales effort. As a co-founder who also does that work of pitching and trying to close deals for our company and for our projects, I didn't have any sales background before I started Emergent Order, although my father would say I've been selling since I was a little boy.
Yeah, it's a very familiar story.
So if I wanted to get a new computer, I would sell the living hell out of why it would be a benefit and what I would do with it and how it was going to be so great and whatever. But tell me your sales story. Like how what was it about sales? That drew you into that? Was it about your personality? Was it something that, and how do you think about sales as a concept? Because I feel like, salespeople get a bad rap, and some of it's deserved and some of it's not, like anything, but it's such an essential part of the process of running a business.
It's critical. Nothing happens until someone sells something, period. And so what I learned when I left golf, I went through the same experience a lot of people go through when they don't necessarily have some sort of technical degree or certification that's required by, say, law or industry fiat to get a particular job. And so I ended up in sales, and that I come to learn later is what happens with 50% of the employment market. But and I'll get to that in a second. But what I learned was that this is obviously a very necessary role and function. That you're right, the industry does get a bad rap, and some of it's justifiable, and certainly some of it's not. And that it's not only is it the most vital and critical aspect to business, especially if your business isn't defensible in some sort of technical or legal way. Like if you don't have a patent on something that prevents anybody else from selling with, if you're the only person with the widget, you can be a dick and still get away with it.
Right.
I mean, just look at government.
Well, I mean, it's funny because even with government, they create these programs, and then people still need to know that the program exists. So even the fact that they might have a monopoly doesn't guarantee that people are going to use their service or going to comply. So even they face a sales challenge.
True. I'm being cynical, but you and I have a shared worldview that many of your listeners may or may not be aware of. But yes. No,
they have it easy. They can just force you to do it. They can say, hey, you know what?
Yeah.
I mean, the best example, like on a daily basis, is every time you go to the gas tank, there's this really terrible product that you are buying by force called corn-based ethanol.
Correct.
No need for a sales force. It's required by law.
Yeah, and then people are shocked when Tesla becomes the most valuable car company in history.
Right.
As a disruptive way of dealing with that. And we can talk about that all day. But what I learned from that experience was, number one, I was good at it and I enjoyed it. I learned the real value of it, which was the skills required to be very successful at it. And I got lucky. Again, my collective experiences sort of helped me become successful and excel in that realm. I was raised by a father who was an officer in a Silicon Valley-based company, and I understood how people like him thought. So therefore I understood how to talk to them. I understood how to communicate with them. I understood what was required to help them. And so I became very successful very quickly in that area. And then I felt like, okay, now I've built this skill set around this individual contribution role, for lack of a better term, that I can apply in other ways, in other areas, right? And then I got immediately recruited away to help start this other company, and we built a really good company and sold it, and it still exists today. And that was the first time I raised venture capital and got involved in that experience. And then I went back and bought the golf company, and then but before that, it all kind of started with this conversation where I started to observe all these great, amazing salespeople. The first sales organization I was a part of had something like 800 salespeople in it.
What was that first job? Yeah, what was that first sales role that when you?
I was doing enterprise sales of like every kind of software, hardware, technology product you can imagine.
So break that down really like individually for me. So who are you? Who is the typical customer? Like, what did they need? What did you have for them?
Yeah, I was selling to essentially Fortune 1000 companies, and I was selling any and every technology solution, quote unquote, that they needed. So whether it was computers or whether it was printers or whether it was software or whether it was services or whether it was overall, integrated solutions of all kinds of stuff. I think about everything that a big company uses from a technology perspective. And they come from different brands and different companies, whether it's Dell or Microsoft or IBM or Toshiba or Hewlett Packard, it doesn't really matter, right? So my job was to work with the different departments inside those companies and try and figure out ways to solve their technology problems.
Did you have to make cold calls as part of your job?
Hell yeah, I had to do 120 dials a day and 4 hours of talk time.
So talk me through what that was like. So
Well, I realized very quickly it was stupid, and not the activity, but the type of activity and really the purpose of the activity. In fact, I was constantly, let's say, admonished or penalized or criticized for not making enough dials or not talking long enough to certain people, because I would spend most of my time doing research on a company, its senior executives, and the things that they cared about 3 to 5 years out. And then I'd figure out from that how I could support those efforts. And that was what I learned about the number one, what I call the number 2 skill required to be successful in professional selling in the innovation economy, and that's business acumen. And if you don't have business acumen, you're not going to be able to determine what value really looks like and then maximize value for you and the people that you're helping.
The only sales book I've ever read this is either lucky or it's confirmation bias, but I've gotten so much value out of it. It's called the challenger sale.
Yes.
And what you're describing sounds a lot like it, which is to say, it starts with this big research project that the authors either referenced or participated in, where they looked at all these salespeople like yourself in that role that you had, and said, okay, and they sort of found a way to chop them up into different kind of styles or psychological profiles, and they honed in on two. One being what you'd think would be the successful salesperson, and one being the actual one. And that what you'd think would be the successful salesperson was the people pleaser, the friendly, quick consensus person. Like, oh, you get off the phone with that salesperson and it's like, oh yeah, that's exactly what we were thinking. We're on the same page. Like, yeah, great, all happy, all lovey-dove. And they said that's not the person that makes the transaction happen. The person that makes it happen is the one that comes into the call. And this was the book's very geared towards what you were talking about and what we do, which is, we have to pitch people on movies that don't yet exist and video ideas that don't yet exist. They're complicated. It's not it's not a widget. It's a complicated solution to often a complicated problem with a lot of people that need to feel good about what you're going to do. And the profile that was basically the challenger. And the challenger was somebody who did a lot of research, like you were just saying, and comes to that phone call with enough insights on the problem, on the business problem with their prospective client to actually offer something insightful and interesting and different. And so the way that call ends that really works isn't, oh, we're on the exact same page. We were talking about that just before we got on the call. The real one is, holy cow, we didn't even think about that problem. Oh my gosh, I can't believe we didn't. Like, oh no. That client leaves the call saying, we should hire this guy.
That's exactly right. And so a couple of things I would say. First of all, the challenger sale is required reading in the sales program at GrowthX Academy. So I know it very well. One of the reasons I love it is because it is rooted in that research from the market, from the corporate executive board and their team, who are the authors. And they do the best, I think, they and CSO Insights do the best research. Serious Decisions is also pretty good. Around effective selling and obviously what the market needs in general. And yes, you're right about the insights. But those insights always start, like every solution always has to start with a clearly defined problem. And those who do the most research and spend the most time focused on the problem are usually the ones that end up solving it, at least coming up with the right way to solve it. Hopefully they can deliver on it, certainly. But it's like somebody once asked Einstein, if you had an hour to solve the world's problems, what would you do? He said, I don't know, but I'd spend the first 55 minutes defining them.
Right.
And that's what insights from a challenger sale kind of an approach comes with. And then what that all was rooted in, the research, John, just for the listener's benefit, was the number one frustration of large enterprise company buyers is that their sellers don't come to them with ideas. That don't literally challenge them in how they think and what they think, especially in today's marketplace, where markets move as quickly as mindsets do. And so thinking differently is what they want first. And then the second thing they want is people who respect how they make decisions. And that's where respecting and understanding how they buy and who's involved in that process is so vital. But that's where I learned, I started to develop my own ideas around this whole thing of sales. And I remember in the course of doing this in my second startup with a PhD, this guy, just really educated, very good friend who actually now, ironically, all these years later, is the dean of GrowthX Academy, Dr. Wayne Neal. Very educated man. I was not. I just went to college to play golf and chase girls. I wasn't interested in it. I barely got out of high school. I was always the kid in trouble. All that stuff, right? That was just me. I was just incorrigible, even to this day. So, and I'm a terrible employee, and I found that out very quickly as well. I'd fire myself.
How so?
I just don't follow the rules. I never have. And I frankly never will, I'd rather try to, find the right way to do something than for the right reasons rather than do it quote unquote right. It's just not who I am. It's not in my DNA. So, sitting around with him one day, having this conversation about, we both had the same observations over the course of our career, and he had another 10 years out in the marketplace off of me, certainly. And he'd worked in big companies as well as startups. We just asked the questions like, why are all the best and most successful salespeople oftentimes college dropouts or even sometimes high school dropouts? And that was really sort of the first description, the question that we asked. They're not overly educated people. They don't follow the rules. They don't necessarily do things the way everybody else does them. And they're the most successful. Why is that? Number one. And then number two, why is there no degree for professional selling? This is ridiculous. 50%. And then you look into the research and you find out, 50% of college graduates end up in customer-facing roles without any background, knowledge, experience, or education.
That's a pretty unbelievable thing to hear. I didn't. This is the first time I've heard that. That it makes sense, right? Because there's 70% of people work in quote unquote services, but they're in service of people, of customers, and so. It makes sense, but I've never heard that put that way.
Right. So now let me carry that through into what that results in, right? I mean, number one, you don't have, there are no job postings out there for college graduates seeking liberal artists. It's just not a thing. Okay. And I know, there's value and benefits to all these experiences, and everybody in big education will try and justify the $250,000 debt they put on these kids these days. With some bullshit about, the general education experience and all the different types of soft skills that they quote unquote learn, which is bullshit. They don't teach soft skills. They never have.
Well, to ruminate on that, it's interesting. I was talking to my son about this and I said, he's 14 and his buddy was complaining that his buddy's super smart, and he was like talking to him about, well, I'm not sure what I want to focus on and what do I want to do. He's a freshman in high school. And I said to my son, you don't need to know what you want to do, especially not now. But it's also going to change over the course of your life. Mm-hmm. And one thing that isn't going to happen is you're not going to discover what you want to do in school, because school is not like any of the things that you will do. Like if you want to be a doctor, being a doctor is nothing like sitting in a medical school classroom. Neither is being a lawyer like sitting in a law school classroom. Neither is being an engineer like sitting in a 200-person lecture about physics. School is nothing like the thing. So,
That's right.
Almost all of us end up getting out of school with whatever we kind of thought, and then actually having to do the thing and either deciding that, that we liked what we chose or moving on. But it's always funny to me, the idea that you're going to either pick what you want to do in college, like that's where you're going to find yourself, or that's like some bracketed point in your life. Well, I'm going to find myself during this 4-year window, and then I'm going to be found. It's like I'm still finding myself. You're 47, I'm 42. We're middle-aged men at this point. I'm still trying to figure it out each and every day. Like that doesn't go away. That's not a. Yeah. It's not really that. I feel like we've done our society such a disservice by formalizing this thing called education and saying like, well, there's this period where you get an education. Like that isn't like each and every day of your life.
Well, somebody smarter than me says education is what other people do to you. Learning is what you do for yourself. And I'm a big believer in that. But our whole system is outdated, right? Outdated thinking about the entire classroom. The only thing that people in a classroom have in common is age and location. And then they're expected to learn the same things at the same pace in the same way. And that whole system was built to support the Industrial Revolution coming out of an agrarian economy 150 years ago as a way to train the future factory workers of America in process and repetition and compliance and obedience.
I think those last two were probably the single most important priorities.
Sure, compliance and obedience, which is why everybody's freaked out about the age of artificial intelligence replacing humans. Well, there's a very simple answer to that question, and that is that if you want to separate yourself from artificial intelligence, then you better build your fucking emotional intelligence. You better use creativity. There will always be things humans can do that machines cannot. And I don't care about, believe me, I have investments in AI, I have investments in machine learning. I get all that. It's all important. It's all going to be great. But I don't believe, like Andrew Yang, that 40% of them, we're going to have 40% employment by 40% unemployment by 2050 because the machines are coming. Every technological revolution has created a whole new set of challenges that have to be addressed. And so, for example, I think it was something like 40% of Americans worked in ag at the turn of in 1900. And today it's 3%. We don't have 37% unemployment.
Yeah, this is the age-old. It's the age-old. It's the age-old fear. It'll be with us probably until we're no longer a creature, for sure. But you create you're digging into this question of where these sales folks come from,
yeah,
and what to do about it. So what happens next? Because it's pretty interesting, especially for someone that has unorthodox views on education.
Yeah. So again, as I was sort of just developing my thoughts and ideas around all this stuff, I was just making observations with other people and having conversations with really smart, awesome people about how does this work? 50% of people or some large number end up in sales-related roles or market-facing roles without background or education, and then the companies end up having to train these people, and turnover in those roles is still close to 60% globally because a lot of people wash out because they don't know what they're getting themselves into to begin with. They're poorly trained, or they come into it with a negative stereotype in their mind that has been perpetuated by, again, I'm going to say the elites and big education and mass media and movies. The death of a salesman and Willy Loman, and used cars and snake oil, and then it's perpetuated in the retail environment by poorly trained, transactional, pushy humans that are pushed from the top down to just drive people towards making a decision even when they're not ready or understanding or appreciating who they are or what they're trying to do. And then everybody thinks that it becomes, it's a negative charlatan sort of existence, when the reality is that when you talk to business leaders who've been around a very long time and very successful, you go ahead and poll CEOs of Global 2000 firms and ask them how important sales is and how critical it is. I mean, it drives everything. They are the most valued members of the organization. They have the highest average earned income. They have the lowest divorce rate of any white-collar roles and lowest suicide rate and highest happiness quotient or quality of life as measured. Meanwhile, doctors and dentists are, hanging themselves from trees. They're doing the Epstein. So it's it's just it's something that people don't really think that deeply about. And then you see the shift in the market and how things are moving more and more and more towards services, right? And less and less away, and there's less and less, as you said, manufacturing and other pieces of the economy. If you're going to create value in the world, you need to do it by helping other people. And so Um, to me, ultimately, when you ask me what is sales? Selling is helping. And in order to help people, you've got to have some key things, right? You've got to have strong emotional intelligence. You've got to have that learning mindset, being a learn-it-all instead of a know-it-all. You've got to have the buoyancy to shut up and listen and process information and enjoy the pause and the silence that exists during those experiences. You've got to have strong business acumen, because if you're going to help somebody else, you have to understand how they do things. If you want to help somebody else make money, you need to understand how they make money. And that's ultimately what it comes down to. And then you've got to have sound market acumen, the ability to quickly understand an industry or a sector or a business model or how business gets done in a particular industry, whether you're selling, whether you're in banking or you're in high tech or you're in automotive or retail, pick it, right? You need to understand those industries very quickly, how the language of that business. Just because we both speak English doesn't mean we both speak the same language, right? You talk to studio people and you're in the art community and you do creative agency work and you do a lot of things I don't. I work in startup tech. We say a lot of the same things, but we use different words to describe it. So you quickly have to be able to adopt and understand that language so that you can articulate the value that you're trying to uncover. And you don't uncover that value unless you have business acumen. And you don't even get people to give you the time and tell you the truth if you don't have emotional intelligence. And so all of those things together, to me, are the skills necessary to be successful in the innovation economy and beat the bots, so to speak. And so when you think about how you would design, how you would educate or create learning opportunities for the world, those are the things that I want to see people develop. And that's what the Academy now does, as the pillars of what it gives to the world is mindset, mastery, career, and community. And it's all centered around those skills and attributes. And that all came from learning those things. But, that all started the first time with Professional Sales College, which is the thing Dr. Neal and I launched the first time to try and be the, first fully conferred 4-year degree in professional sales. At the time, there were only 16 universities in North America even offering any kind of programming. Today, there's a couple hundred, so we're moving in the right direction. But everybody should be doing it. If they want to stay relevant anyway, they should be doing it, because this is what we need. And people should be proud of the profession, and it should be elevated in society to its rightful place, alongside being a doctor or an accountant or an engineer or a lawyer. Well, not a lawyer, but but you get my point.
Well, as a little aside, I think lawyers, like salespeople, have a mix of a bad rap that is deserved, but it's also partly because I think, like salespeople, you have very different kinds of lawyers and very different kinds of sales.
Yes, that is true. I like to make the joke, but you're absolutely right. So, for example, we've got, I've had lawyers go through the Academy program. I remember sitting down with one who was a Princeton-educated undergrad, Harvard law guy, working in the top, one of the top firms in San Francisco. And I literally asked him, why are you making this transition to business development? Because I know a lot of lawyers who are excellent at business development because of the skills they acquire, the discipline, the work ethic that they have. And he said, I was tired of trying to figure out how to hurt people every day. I want to help them. And it had to do with the kind of lawyering he was doing, right?
Yeah.
He was doing corporate litigation and, civil suits and stuff where literally you have to dig into those weeds and try and figure out how to screw people over. And that wasn't how he was built. So I agree with you.
It's a tough thing. It's a tough thing when you're in a position that you're, at the level of the system, you have to be adversarial because it's how it's set up. It's sort of by design that if you're in a litigation scenario, both sides come at each other with everything they can right up to the boundary and slightly over the boundary so that they can discover where the boundary really is. But when you're having to do things, that feel wrong, but sort of philosophically, they're ultimately right, but they feel wrong in the doing, that is such a difficult place to be as an individual person. It just it doesn't create it's really hard to maintain like healthy habits of mind when you feel like, okay, well, yeah, I feel like on a day-to-day basis I'm trying to find technical ways to get the upper hand over somebody. Like that just doesn't feel good.
And that's what happens in a fixed mindset, not an abundance mindset, right? Like if you believe the pie is finite, right, then that's how people behave. Like everything's a zero-sum game, and that there is a winner and a loser. But if you have an abundance mindset, which says, the pie gets bigger as you add more value to it, regardless of where it comes from. It's a very different way of thinking, and that's my view. That's what I've come to learn, and that's how I kind of look at it. I don't know if you know Paul Zane Pilzner's work of economic alchemy, but he certainly shaped a lot of my thinking around these sorts of things, especially around the transition.
I'm not familiar with him.
Yeah, he's fantastic. You got to read his stuff. Yeah, he's won a Nobel Prize, and he's been for economics, and he's been an advisor to multiple presidential administrations on both sides of the aisle. He's a really, really sharp character. But he talks a lot about how technology and the development of it always creates greater opportunity. Like we can grow 100 times more food on the same acre of land today than we could 100 years ago. Right? If you'd ask, we complain about ethanol, corn-based stuff today, but imagine how they felt in the 1970s. And the fuel efficiency and just us constantly using technology to drive efficiencies and make everything better, and the ability to transform the workforce and the economies to create more. And his book, Unlimited Wealth, talks all about it. And it's fantastic. But you're talking very much the same language as me on this stuff, right? It's like, how do we help more people? Because, every time you help someone, it helps someone else. It's like in the Valley. I know I'm going to get in trouble for this, because you and I have, much more honest and direct conversations in a hotel bar in New York City than I'm going to have in public on a recorded podcast. But I will say, that in the Valley, there's this big thing about social impact investing, right? And this idea that, if I invest in a certain kind of business, it has a social impact that's greater than investing in some other kind of business. And I would argue that every investment has a social impact, because where does that money go? Right? That money goes to feed people. You put $1 million into a startup, that money's not going necessarily into capital equipment these days. It's going into talent. It's going to people who are writing code and building software, and then those people are feeding their families and then consuming, and then they're turning around and putting it back into the marketplace. And it all has a social impact.
Yeah, this is one of these stories that is so deeply rooted and false, and it's this idea that business or that commercial life. Again, you talked about zero-sum game, and I think it underpins that mindset. That's the mindset that underpins this story. Well, you have business, and then you have what you do for others. It's like, well, what do you think business is? Like, I have to make someone else so happy that they'll pay me for what I'm doing for them.
Well, yeah, look at Amazon. I talk about Amazon right now in the world of the innovation economy. They are the wealthiest or the most valuable company right now in the marketplace, and they don't make anything except everyone happy. And that's the essence of the experience economy, right? And you go back and you watch Jeff Bezos's interview with 60 Minutes, probably 20, 25 years ago, after they went public, and the guy's giving him a hard time about creating shareholder value with just selling books and e-commerce, and you don't really have all this. He says, we're completely obsessed with the customer experience, and if we do that right, everything else will take care of itself. And of course, he's proven it to be right, because that's been their singular focus. and that's where we are now.
It is a weird, so you have, this whole domain, this, corporate social responsibility and social impact investing. And it's not that it's, look, at some level, there's nothing wrong with that in the sense that if you have a particular way of thinking about your priorities, good for you. If you want to focus on companies that are working in the energy sector or to try to change that to be less fossil fuel dependent or whatever it is that you care about, that's great, but that doesn't make it more moral or more, quote, social. That term social is sort of the insert feel good here. It's such an ill-defined.
Yeah, it's a word to describe the morality, and then when people start, assigning value to morality in a fixed mindset world where there's, I'm more moral than you, then you're starting to get into the righteous mind, which starts to get into danger zones, and then, logic and reason goes out the window.
It's I think there's so much, in so many ways. I feel like my what inspires me creatively is trying to find the stories that can, and the ways of creating inspiration along those lines of, essentially that business is great. I mean, like, yes. What's more essentially human than I'm going to figure out a way to solve somebody else's problem so that they will actually trade their time for it, because that's what your money is, right? Your money is like a receipt. Mm-hmm. The best explanation I've ever heard of what money really is it's a receipt for your contribution.
Yes.
So you come into work, you make a contribution to somebody else, and you get a receipt for it called money. And that receipt is then how you trade that contribution for the thing you want. And man, getting somebody to turn over one of those receipts for all that hard work and time they put in to you and what you're offering them, you better be doing a good job. And obviously there's shysters and there's fraud and there's, everything that goes along with being a human being.
That's right.
In every domain. But there's nothing special. There's nothing about business that's got a special claim on fraud or dishonesty. I mean,
no, of course not.
Behold politics, where you've professionalized fraud. So if there's something deeply ingrained in humanity that for some reason has a distrust of commerce in certain ways. And it's downright biblical. You can go back to just like usury laws. There's just certain things that just feel wrong.
Oh, sure. But this always comes back down to the laws of power, right? And storytelling can be used for that just as much as it can be used for the other side. And it's narrative and who controls and drives the narrative, right? But you're right. It's I guess it's unique. It's what makes us uniquely human. Is that behavior. There are good, there are bad. There are people who do it for good and do it for bad. I try not to assume intent. I try to measure impact. Whether that's in, my leadership style or my management style or my approach towards helping others, or even dealing with, difficult people or difficult situations and conversations. And that's sort of how I kind of address that.
So on our way towards expanding on the way GrowthX has approached, helping businesses excel and find their place in the market, I want to get an understanding of your experience in what I'll just call sort of a typical or traditional venture capital. In one of the presentations you sent me, you mentioned sort of what you're trying to do is different than, quote, Sandhill Road.
Yeah.
What's your experience? Like, what does it mean? Like, what is the venture capital experience? Like, obviously we've got Silicon Valley on HBO, all these Uber and all these companies and these unicorns and this sort of like this, tech has now become a dominating cultural force by virtue of how many different tech products we use on a daily basis through our screens. And it's been, and especially in the past decade, it's obviously become this hugely disruptive cultural force. And as a result, we've got all kinds of other cultural institutions that have turned on it, like the media, because the tech has eaten the media's lunch, as my friend Balaji Srinivasan points out. So of course they're going to hate it now.
Yeah.
It's like they loved it, and then they were like, and then Google and Facebook ate all their advertising lunch, and now they hate it.
Sure.
It's incredibly like transparently self-serving the way the media narrative is turned against tech, but there is interesting issues in venture capital. So like, what does that typically look like, or like either today or has looked like for you in the past, because you're solving against some of this?
Yeah. Well, traditionally, venture is an asset class for investing money, right? That is designed to do overall big fast. Like the idea is, if I can throw a bunch of money at one of the promises of technology from an investor's point of view is scale, right? So like if you're building a piece of software and you do it well for, one user, you can do it for billions of users, right? See Facebook and Google.
Right.
As examples, right? And again, yes, these are unicorns for a reason. We call them that for a reason. There are very few that exist, if they've ever existed at all. But the idea is that it's very scalable, and therefore it can be exponentially valuable and deliver ridiculously outsized returns, right? Like the whole idea of investing, whatever it was, I can't remember the numbers, but you invested $50,000 in Uber. It was worth, last year at their height, something like $400 million, right? It was, just to give you an example, right? The guys at BAM Ventures who put the first money into honey, and the big honey acquisition, that $50K turned into, $150 million for them or something. I can't remember the number. But that's what gets people excited. That's what gets them involved in it. And then there's an economic business model attached to venture, which is why venture, I think, is broken and doesn't really solve the problems of today's marketplace, and why we innovated around that. This thing called the 2 and 20 model. There's a management fee that the people who manage a venture fund, they're called the GP, the general partners, they get 2% of that fund value that they're managing every year to manage the fund. That essentially goes to salaries, right?
Right.
And so, say you've got a $10 million fund, you're paid $200,000 a year to manage it. And the people of the ilk in the market that run these things make a lot more money than that usually, and can make more money than that doing other things. So what they tend to do is raise more money. Hey, I can raise $100 million and get $2 million a year in management fees, right? Whereas on $10 million, I get $200,000. So that's what they do. They raise more money. But then they have to deploy that money intelligently. And so they tend to overinvest in companies and not help them enough. And so what we learned is that the time when companies need the most help, when they're most fragile, is in the really early stages. We call it the seed stage, in terms of when they have an early product. They might have a couple of early customers. They might have a little bit of revenue, or as you like to call them, receipts for contribution in the bank that they're getting. And I like that analogy, by the way. They typically are raising a little bit of money, not a lot. And they're usually raising it from multiple people. So say we write a check to a company that's raising $1 million, we write a $100,000 check. Technically, based on that model, the 2% model, we're paid $2,000 a year to give a shit about that company. So we don't really put much time into helping. And that's the same goes for the other funds that are putting money in it, or investors. So they're really kind of left to their own devices to prove out their model, find what we call product market fit, where their product fits somewhere in the market where they demonstrate enough profitable demand that they can't keep up with it, so they need to raise more money. And that's where most of them fail. As I said at the beginning of this conversation, 70% of companies that raise money at this stage don't raise more money. And it's usually because they don't find product market fit. And the funds that are investing in them are investing more so money than anything else. Yeah, they might give them access to their network of potential customers and mentors and advisors and things like that. And they do all those things. That's fine. And believe me, I'm the last person in the world to call any of these people evil. I'm not I don't caricature venture that way at all. Like I said, it's an asset class. Investments are made. Returns come from those investments. But most bets fail, and they expect most of them to fail, but they expect 1 in 10 to be a massive success so that they can deliver a nice return. And anybody can
What's the 20 in 2 and 20?
That's called the 20% carry, and that's just a term in the industry. It operates just like hedge funds or anything else, where the partners get 20% of the profits once the fund is made whole. So 80% goes to the investors, 20% goes to the fund managers. So that's their carrot, right? That's their big upside. So if you got a $100 million fund, a company, you get a company with $1 billion exit that you own 20% in, $200 million comes back to the fund. The first $100 million goes back to the investors, and then 20% of the other 100 goes to the partners, and 80% goes back to the investors.
So that's really so to make sure I'm understanding it and sort of relaying that for the listener is, so I want to start a venture capital firm, and I've got a bunch of people I know. Maybe I'll put in my own money, but let's say I'm not going to do that. I'm gonna raise funds from people, the investors that trust me, think I've got the right connections and the smarts. And so my model is going to be, I'm going to raise a bunch of money. I'll just say $100 million to make it easy. And then there's going to be a 2% annual fee for running this thing. So I'm going to get $2 million out of that 100 per year to build my staff and my team and pay myself.
Yeah, and typical fund has like a 5-year investment cycle, right? But yeah, so you would do that for 5 years, correct?
Yeah, and so then I'm going to do this for 5 years, invest across 10, 20, however many companies, recognizing that most will fail, but hopefully 1 out of the 10 is going to be this rocket ship that makes it all worthwhile. So it's a sort of a very what's called like a power law distribution.
That's exactly right. I was going to use the term, but you already got it. That's right.
So that like this is a super slopey. It's a you look at all the successful books and it looks like a power law where you've got all these books that are middling, and then you've got Harry Potter and Twilight on the left side of the graph. That
and they make the publisher. That defines success for the publisher, right?
Yeah, so it's like, okay, as long as we get a Harry Potter a year, I've heard, movie studios work this way. They want to have, as long as you have a couple, you have a couple hits, you can suffer a lot of bombs.
That's exactly right.
And so on the back end, then that 20 part is that when that happens and you have that, like basically my reward for having created this fund and made investments that made our investors money is they keep 80% of the return and I get to keep 20% after they've recouped what they've gotten. Is that right?
Yeah, that is right.
So, and as you said, the way that math seems to reward making bigger bets, because if I've put $100K into a company, I'm only getting $2,000 on that $100K to care per year, which is not a lot relative to putting 10 million into a company.
That's right. So most of the fund managers tend to work at the later stage where they need more money, where they figured this stuff out on their own for the most part, and then they invest in the ones that have figured it out on their own. And that's not necessarily. I understand why they do it completely. Again, I think the model drives that behavior. If you're operating within those rules, the game is set up that way, then there you go. It makes sense. But we didn't come from venture. We were all entrepreneurs, and we didn't look at it that way. We'd all raised venture and operated within that world, but as operators, right?
Right.
Not as fund managers. So we just said, all right, well, we want to be more helpful because we need to, because that's what our companies need. And so we just focused on the problem and the need and tried to figure out a way to sort of, as I like to say, hack venture to make it work. So we set out on a quest to do that, and it took us quite a while, but about 2 years in, we finally sort of figured out an economic model that made sense. And I think we unlocked an incentive structure that really is the foundation for any successful ecosystem going forward. And that's really important that I want to share that with the world, that we do is that there is a way to fully align incentives with everybody in the ecosystem that hasn't been there before. And so our structure now allows us, it's really quite elegant. It's more, we've added a clause to our investor agreement, and our investors are completely aware of it, and they know that this is how we do things, and they want to be a part of it. That allows us to invest their capital, not just in the company, but in a team of market developers that I have personally trained in our methodology and our framework to help those companies find the truth about where their product fits in the market, how to do it in a very efficient way, and discover the business model that goes with it, and be able to do it economically to where it makes sense for everyone. So for every dollar that we invest in a company, so we write a $100,000 check, we get $100,000 in equity, right? And say the valuation of that company at that time is $5 million. So for a $100,000 check, we get 2% ownership. And that's just like anybody else, right? A dollar exchange for a dollar of equity.
Sure.
But when we're now investing in a team to help them grow, we have a framework with milestones attached to it, traction-based milestones that say if we do all these things together and we learn these things together and we accomplish these things, we earn additional equity. And you don't have to pay any member of our team to help you. You opt into the program. We opt in together. We decide we want to work together. We work towards these milestones, and we earn additional equity for the work performed. As long as the amount of equity that we earn and the value of that equity, I should say, not the amount, but the value of that equity is $2 of equity for every dollar we spend on that market development team to help them, then everybody's happy. So in other words, our help is worth twice as much as our money. And so our investors love it because they know exactly what our program is. They know the people that are working on it are sound, solid, known commodities. They're de-risking the opportunity for them. They're also providing insights on how things are going should those investors want to put more money in. They also provide insights on how things are going should those investors not want to put more money in, and advise them in both directions and be honest about it.
So tell me about what this concept of market fit and finding the market is, and I'll raise sort of the example of the iPod or even the iPhone, but I'll say the iPod even especially. When the iPod first came out and it said, okay, 1,000 songs in your pocket in 2001, it's not clear that there was a market for carrying around 1,000 songs in your pocket. Like, it's not clear that anybody, if you polled them, it's the old Henry Ford quote, if I asked people what they wanted, they would say, I need faster horses. They wouldn't imagine a car because it didn't exist yet. Steve Jobs said, you have to skate to where the puck is going to be, not to where it is. So, what does this mean to discover the market and to find the fit for your product in the market? Does it, especially when like some of these, like these Uber, these the most disruptive companies seem to
create markets,
unlock new markets or create markets that for things that weren't even conceivable. Like, oh, I'm going to use a piece of software that lets you have strangers pick you up in their own Honda Civics. Like, it's just, every one of these ideas, I'm going to, or eBay, I'm going to actually create an anonymous marketplace where you will buy used goods from strangers and pay in advance. Like every one of these things, you explain them, and they sound like the rantings of a lunatic, right up to the moment where they suddenly are what everybody uses and is normalized. So, what is all this? How do you think about this? What it means to have a market and to find it?
Yeah, so there's a couple of points there, right? So again, let's start with the definition of product market fit. It was a phrase that was coined by Mark Andreessen, founder of Netscape, and major investor here in Silicon Valley, Andreessen Horowitz, to talk about what happens or how you define that moment when when you are ready for scaling whatever it is that you're building. Going back to my comment about venture capital and technology and the promise of the opportunity to scale something. So there's a certain point, call it an inflection point, where that becomes possible. It's been de-risked enough. There's enough knowns to say that if I just put more, fuel on this fire, it's going to expand. And that fuel being resources, right, in the form of capital. I simply define it as, it's sort of like the Supreme Court with the whole pornography thing. I can't tell you what it is, but I know it when I see it. It is when the market starts to pull you in a certain direction as opposed to you pushing, right? So based on the resources you have, you can't keep up with people's demand for what you're offering. And so that's the first thing. And the second thing, with respect to the comments of the jobs in, Ford comments, all that stuff, they all had to go through that learning curve. Even with those kinds of disruptive technologies, there was still a point in time where they had to figure out that 1,000 songs in your pocket was the positioning.
Right.
Henry Ford did not invent the vehicle, right? It was invented long before Henry. He figured out a way. His innovation was the assembly line. That was his first innovation. The second was to pay his people enough money so they could turn around and spend it on his cars. But also there's a difference between there's types of innovations, John, right? So there are, as Jeffrey Moore calls it, there's continuous innovation and discontinuous innovation. A discontinuous innovation is something that's so disruptive that it creates significant behavioral change, which is why there's so few of them that actually make it. Because we as humans don't like change. We like things just the way they are. And there's obviously biophysical answers to those questions, right? Homeostasis. Our body likes exactly where it is at this point in time, more than anywhere else.
Momentum.
That's our natural state. Correct. Momentum versus inertia. Yeah. So there are very few things that are discontinuous in innovation, right? So like the cell phone was a discontinuous innovation. Everything before that was a landline. Right? The cell phone was invented in 1971, 72?
Something like that, but it doesn't even start to be. It's not until the 80s that you even start to see it as a thing in Wall Street, the Wall Street movie, and these
or Lethal Weapon.
Bricks.
Danny Glover sitting on the bridge with that, with the holding the box with the phone, saying, "Is this guy as crazy as I think he is?" And yes, by the way, he was. But there's a perfect example of the third point I'm going to make, which is with respect to discontinuous innovations, what makes them work post-product market fit is this thing called convergence, where every element of the ecosystem lines up at the same time. An Uber would never have been possible without GPS on a smartphone.
Right. It's a kind of, even these big shifts tend to be the product of they're like an adjacent possibility based on what is all around.
Correct. So there is, and that's a continuous innovation is an adjacent. So you can talk about it in a couple of different ways, right? Like McKinsey does its 3 horizon thing: horizon 1, 2, and 3. I call them core, adjacent, and disruptive. So a core innovation is hey, I've improved something. So the iPhone 11, that's a core innovation. Right? An adjacent innovation to the iPhone 11 might be, I don't know, AirPods, or the Apple Watch. the truly disruptive innovation, came with the first smartphone.
Right.
And I don't even know, and that wasn't even, the original iPhone. I mean, I had a Palm, back in, there was BlackBerry, there were several others before that. And I wrote a whole article about this called The Lasting Mover Advantage, why you should try to build to last, not build to be first. Because Google wasn't the first search engine, Amazon wasn't the first major e-commerce company, Apple didn't build the first smartphone, etc. It's the ones that know how to continue to innovate on top of what they've already done by doing three things very, very well. One is owning a use case. The second is owning the thoughts and behaviors of the individuals, of your customers in that use case. And the third is to own the relationship. And that's what lasting movers do very, very well, in my view. And then if there's a fourth one, I would say they know how to innovate their business model in support of those ever-changing use cases, and then thoughts and behaviors and relationship dynamics. So does that make sense?
Yeah.
So the convergence creates that that third piece there.
So you've got a this investment / sort of support, or was it right to call it an accelerator?
Yeah, so we call it it's a startup accelerator, but it's different than any other one that we know about because it was designed to operate only within the fund in a very bespoke fashion. So since most accelerators are out there, there are two things about them, right? Their primary focus is to help founders develop products and raise money. Ours is focused on companies that have already developed products and raised money. So therefore, we're focused on developing markets and making money. That's the first thing. The second thing is the traditional accelerator delivery model is what's called cohort driven. It's like a batch or a factory model. They'll bring in a group of companies and they'll start on day one, and they'll be together for 90 days or 120 days or 180 or whatever the number is, just like a classroom. The only thing they have in common is the age of their company, the stage of their company and their location.
Right.
And then
this would be like Y Combinator is
exactly.
The one that maybe people have heard of.
Right. Y Combinator, 500 Startups are the two most probably well-known ones. And again, also operated very well on the power law distribution. Like 90% of the returns in the YC funds are from like 4 to 5 companies, even though they have like close to 1,000 investments now. And so anyway, so that's how they traditionally, and there's nothing wrong with those, just like there's nothing wrong with venture in and of itself. We just had a different philosophy and approach and mindset that said that we want to invest in companies that care more about our help than our money. And we think we can reduce the failure rate of our own companies, increase the overall return by helping them develop their market and make money. And we found an economic model to support it. And so when we did, those kinds of results started to happen. And the next thing we've learned because of that was, all right, well, now these companies eventually have to go out, leave the nest, and fly on their own. And we knew that there was a dearth of talent, stage-relevant talent, as we call it. People who've actually worked in startups at this stage, who understand the stage dynamic and have the right characteristics and attributes to be successful in it. Not so much the skill set, but the right mindset. Because being in a startup is very different than being in a big company. And what most startups do is they go out and they hire people from their industry that have relationships and experience. And they usually come from big companies that have already been successful in that industry and have been operating for years, who've never operated in a startup.
Yeah, one of the things that when I first started Emergent Order with Josh and Lisa, one of the first, Josh and I like to say, like getting smacked with the bat of reality. And one of the bats of reality that hit us hard early was, wow, so we were in Viacom and yeah, I had this budget to manage, but what wasn't in my budget was all of the infrastructure that Viacom had. They had a legal department, they had a payroll department, they had they had all this stuff that made it fundamentally different managing a department or managing a product versus managing or building a company. It was like a category difference. It wasn't just, I can manage a team so I can run a company. There was a fundamentally different set of things that we had to grapple with and get comfortable with. That was very different coming out of a big company like Viacom and then starting your own thing. And
yeah, people don't see that
3
stuff.
And then 8 and
the
nobody
person,
tells you about it.
Yeah, exactly. And they also, oftentimes, again, you don't see the sales, you don't see the marketing, you don't see the back office stuff, all of that. It's all very different that way. So finding people who have talent.
And MBAs don't teach any of that. They're like big company case studies. They're just like, okay, well, how did Walmart overcome X, Y, and Z? It's like that. So that tells you nothing about how to start a business or find a customer.
That's right.
Which I was shocked to learn.
No, you're absolutely right. Again, and this goes to the system. The education system was designed to look down on sales as some sort of second-class status. And so they don't. And then in the Valley, they've been very much focused on science and technology and not enough on business and sales. And that's how we ended up in this situation to begin with. And then you look around and you find out that nobody's training or educating people in these kinds of things. So I touched on soft skills earlier, which I think it's funny we call them that because they're the hardest ones to master. And they're not taught, right? Critical thinking, emotional intelligence, the ability to handle and respond to change, embracing ambiguity, communicating well across different functions with different kinds of people, handling difficult conversations, how to run a frickin' meeting. Simple things that you and I go, we do these things every day, but we had to learn them. Somebody taught us and it wasn't in a school. So we had to come up with a way to do that. And so we looked around and we didn't really see it. So we launched a boot camp. We knew that the market was full of technical boot camps, and they're great. They teach people how to code, for example, so they can work in these companies. But nobody was teaching people the non-tech roles. And there was a lot of people, like the lawyer I was talking about earlier, who come from traditional industries that wanted to work in technology but didn't want to be software developers or engineers. So GrowthX Academy was launched to do that. So we built a program to train people on how we help our companies grow. We launched a program in professional selling. We launched a program in what we call growth marketing, growth hacking, digital marketing, modern digital marketing skills that constantly respond with technical skills as well as critical thinking and data-driven skills, and knowing how to use the right tools to reach your customers digitally. And then UX design and design thinking in general, which is the hottest growing role in technology. Again, how do you deliver that Apple, Amazon-like experience to your customers with what you build? And then we've recently added data science as a way to, once again, another fast-growing role where we're generating more data every day than we have throughout human history. And how are we using that information to make better decisions and better choices? And so that accidentally created another business model that created a community and an ecosystem around the fund and the accelerator with the people who wanted to work for them and with them. And then that meant they started working on real projects with companies in our portfolio and companies in the whole overall ecosystem, because the first rule of accelerated learning is direct experience. So they'd come in for these fully immersive 12-week programs, and they'd spend more than half of their time working on real projects with real startups, building a portfolio of experience, learning where they want to fit in the market, and creating their own, I like to call person company fit, applying the same principles to helping them find a fit in the market for themselves as we do for companies. And that really started to blow up. And next thing you know, you build this global network of mentors, people who want to hire them, people who want to give back to the community, and while they're building their own brand because they get it, because they all went through the same shit you and I went through. And then that started to create opportunities to help other companies outside of our fund at scale and corporations and governments the way that I talked about before. And it sort of evolved into an accidental ecosystem. Now I spend a lot of my time going around helping communities and governments and educators and systems thinkers and investors, entrepreneurs, et cetera, all think about how to build their own sustainable ecosystems where they are using our model. Because the beauty of it is that you can do this in a tiny town with just, you could do this in Jackson, Mississippi, or you could do this in Chicago, and be just as successful in either direction. Because there's always entrepreneurs, there's always investors who want to help, who want to invest in them. There's always an ecosystem that wants to support them, whether it's public or private. Who want to work with them. There's always people who want to learn and develop the skills to do this stuff. And that's what I've noticed and have learned over the last several years of doing this, working outside of our own ecosystem, is that there's really three things missing. They're missing this aligned incentive structure that I told you that we kind of innovated ourselves, where investors, entrepreneurs, those who want to buy from them and those who want to work for them, all have a fully aligned economic incentive. They're missing a framework for actually how to execute successfully on finding customers, getting customers, keeping them, and growing them. And then they're missing a business model. Most of these ecosystem players that are trying to create their own version of the valley are highly dependent on public funds, government programs, which are always at the whims of the politicians, et cetera, and are always changing. And that's not what's in the best interest of the community or the ecosystem or the entrepreneurs. But if they could build their own sustainable ecosystem through services and through education with the academy and the other things that can be done for the community, they can be less reliant on public programming and be more dynamically responsive and supportive to the needs of their community.
So, you talked about working with cities and with, applying this mix of insights and incentives and sort of programs in other contexts. Can you give me a tangible example of like how does that manifest outside of the world of creating an ecosystem for tech companies that how do you take what you're doing and apply it to something that's not that same that isn't a for-profit enterprise?
Sure. Whether it's for-profit or not, they still need a way to fund their operations to achieve their mission, right? So ironically, not-for-profits seem to be more focused on money than for-profits in how they behave
Yes.
On a daily basis. At least that's been my experience. I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I just enjoy the irony, and that irony is my favorite form of humor. But the idea is, so for example, let's take a government-funded innovation center in Toronto, Ontario, Canada, for example. I won't name names, but this is an exact example. These folks have been trying for years to help more companies than they currently help, but they're always limited by government funding. They also recognize that there's a big gap in their programming. They provide a lot of help in corporate formation, like getting a business started, opening bank accounts, setting up QuickBooks, things like that.
Relatively low-level administrative support, basically.
Yeah. And then they also can provide mentorship through volunteers that will come in and do sessions or do office hours and spend a little bit of time with an entrepreneur. Think of, for example, in America, there's that system SCORE, right, which is a small business administration program. So they do little things like that. But they still have the same problem. Their companies are failing for the same reasons. and they are limited in how many they can help. So they're trying to find other ways of supporting themselves. And some of them are doing it through little things like, okay, I'm renting space in my building to generate some revenue, or I might run the occasional workshop and charge for it, if I even can, because oftentimes when they take government money of a certain amount, there's a lot of strings that come with that. Certain programs have to be free, et cetera, right? So they're limited, and they're struggling. What they would love to do is be able to go back to the government and say, I have a 2-year plan to build a sustainable business model here, where I still want to obviously work with you and receive funding for certain things, but I don't need it exclusively. It doesn't drive my entire business anymore. So we provide them with the core MXP Accelerator program, which attracts great entrepreneurs from around their region because it's unique and different. It has a strong brand. They have the Academy as a way to generate tuition-based programs that people pay for. And then because of tuition programs in those communities, they've got ways to get reimbursed for reskilling and upskilling the workforce, especially an out-of-work workforce. There's a big problem with STEM workers in different parts of Canada, for example. High unemployment due to the current nature of the oil and gas industry up there, where a lot of people work. There is the ability, corporations are knocking down the doors of these innovation centers because they say they're government innovation centers and they're looking for help because they're afraid of being the next yellow cab in the age of Uber. And they don't want to get disrupted out of business. So they're trying to come up with new business models, build digital products to support their physical businesses. They don't have the skill set to do it. They don't know how to think through it. They may want to build their own accelerators to attract the best startups into their community, or they might want to invest venture. They might want to get into the corporate venture business, which is the fastest growing sector of venture capital right now. Last year, there were 60% more corporate venture offices than there were the year prior.
And what is that? Just
that means big companies. That means big companies launching their own venture funds, funding it themselves, but behaving like venture capitalists, participating
like
in
Google Ventures, for example.
Correct. Intel's venture capital arm is, in fact, I think, the most successful venture capital group in the history of venture in the Valley. More so than any of the independent funds on Sand Hill Road. So yes, so there's a lot of that happening now because they all recognize that they need to get involved in that game because people are disrupting their market so quickly with different ways of doing things. So there's a demand from corporations. There's a demand from the talent in the community. There's a demand from the entrepreneurs and a demand from the investors for these centers and these organizations to better support their community. And once again, they're really missing the right blend of the three things I talked about: a fully aligned incentive structure, a business model, and a framework to grow, and bring everybody together in support of that in a measurable way. And so they will bring us in to essentially license our model and advise them on how to stand it up, set it up, support them. And as we continue to get better at what we do and interconnect the different licensing partners around the world with each other, we can build this global network of growth Xers, for lack of a better word, who know how to help companies do the right things in the right order and fashion with limited resources in the most capitally efficient way to build sustainable businesses. And by the way, they don't all have to be venture capable, John. There's very few businesses that are really conducive or best suited for taking venture money versus other traditional forms of financing. And building a business that, again, serves your customers, your family, and your community, even at small scale, is still a win.
Right. Yeah.
In the Valley, it's not necessarily a win. They call it, they laugh at it and call it a lifestyle business. I don't see anything wrong with that. personally. And a lot of people don't. I don't want to say they all do, but that's how venture views it. It's like, okay, you're building a lifestyle business. That's not venture capable because, again, we need the companies that are going to hit billion-dollar numbers, right? We're looking for billion with a B exits.
Yeah, like the last thing you want is if you want to have 10 at bats with the hope of one popping, every one of them at least has to have the potential to pop.
Yeah, you're not going to get $1 billion exit out of a company that puts an IoT device into a hockey puck in Toronto to make it easy to track where the puck is going, so to speak, to bring it all full circle. But that's what I mean. And so those things aren't necessarily venture capable businesses. You're doing some bespoke coffee company or you've got some new interesting widget that works great, but it works in a very small market. So therefore your valuation is never going to be that high. That's the kind of stuff that doesn't mean you can't still win. Doesn't mean you still can't build a great business. You can, and you can leverage this way of thinking and executing to give yourself a better chance.
So as we come to the conclusion of our time together, I thought I'd ask kind of a big picture question that's right in your name, and that is growth. Why for you? I mean, it's in your name, GrowthX. Why does growth matter? Growth as a concept can be controversial in a lot of circles. There's people who believe that we've either come to the end of the age of growth, or that growth is bad because of some sense that the planet or the environment or something can't continue to experience growth. So how do you both at the level of just tactical for a business, why is growth important, and a big picture as a mindset and as a framework for understanding the world, why growth?
Yeah, because to me, growth is a mindset first and foremost. It's not necessarily about physical growth or financial growth, economic growth. Certainly, those are metrics that can be applied, but none of it it all begins and ends with personal development. I believe in the innovation economy. There's no distinction anymore between personal and professional development, or personal and professional growth. If you develop the person, you'll develop the professional, and that therefore you can contribute to the growth of your community in terms of how they think about the world, how they develop themselves, how they develop their families, how they develop their community, how they develop their customers, their value in the world. And that's what, to me, when I came up with the name GrowthX, it was all about exponential growth for the person.
And then for the company, beyond just like more money, good. Why growth?
Yeah, well, I mean, everybody that we're helping is usually starting from sort of a fixed place of 0 to 1, right? I mean, they haven't, or 1 to end. They need some measure of growth in order to build something sustainable. They're not in a sustainable position yet. So if you think about the stage of the company and the environment in which they're operating, none of them are self-sustaining yet. So there has to be some measure of growth in order for them to get to break even or a place where they have options. They're empowered to make choices, where they can take care of the basic needs of themselves and the people that are involved with them. And that's where most failure happens, is before you get to that point. And in order to get there, you got to grow.
Yeah, so it's growth as escape velocity.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to use escape velocity as, if you define it as giving yourself you're escaping from the shackles of more money going out than more money coming in. Yeah.
Well, when you look ahead to the future, what do you think is the most exciting thing taking place in the world of startups? Is there a sector? Is there a style? Is it AI?
I still hold out most hope for, for decentralization, the Napsterization of the internet, is the thing to me right now that's most exciting. And that is, I know people, we talk about blockchain, and you and I've talked about this before. I haven't seen a whole lot of business models yet that have emerged that are really hugely or wildly successful, but I know there will be. Change tends to take longer than people want it to, but when it does come, it comes at a greater rate than we expect it to. So I like the idea of decentralization. I like the idea of opening up the spectrum to 5G and beyond. I like things that empower the individuals to lift them out of whatever situation they're in and give them the mobility that they want to move out of wherever they are to wherever they want to be. Whether that's the eradication of poverty to moving from one class to another, or being able to give your community a little bit more than what you've been able to contribute in the past, to help others help others, right? And I think ultimately, at the end of the day, the positive impact that you can leave on the individuals is the ultimate metric.
Well, I think that's a great place for us to stop. Sean, thank you so much for taking this time with me. It's exciting to see what you've built and that you're able to replicate it. And I really encourage everybody to check out GrowthX.
Thanks, Johnny. This was awesome. And I'll see you at South by in Austin in a month or so.
Sounds great.
All right, man.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to the Emergent Order podcast. If you haven't already, be sure to subscribe on iTunes, Spotify, or your favorite podcasting app. If you're interested in being a guest, shoot us an email at podcast@emergentorder.com. Our producer is Jesse Bennett. Thanks again, and speak to you next time.